Hello everyone, Christina here from Our Wood Home. I'm going to be showing you today how to make a really simple skirt out of a non-stretchy fabric. I'll probably spread this video out over the course of a few days just for time constraints, but it doesn't take very long at all. I just have other things to do throughout my day, so I'll probably space it out. But right now I'll show you how to take measurements and draw out the shape that you need to get your skirt started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is measure ourselves so we know how big to cut our fabric. So you're going to need a tape measure. I've got a fabric tape measure here. If you don't have this kind, if all you have is like those metal construction tape measures, you can use a piece of string or yarn or rope, whatever. Use that to measure around yourself and then lay it flat against your metal measuring tape and get the measurement that way. But I've got this kind, so that's what I'll be doing. So you'll want to measure yourself at the widest part of your lower half and get as close as you can without being, without squeezing the measuring tape against yourself. All right, so mine is 38, and I'm writing this down just to keep track for my own benefit. So get your measurement and then add 8 to that. So mine's 38, and we're gonna do, I'm just doing it on my phone here, 38 plus 8, so that's 46, and then you divide that number by 2. So mine is 23 inches. So that's going to determine the width of each skirt panel that we'll be making. Next, you want to figure out the length that you want. So you do this by holding the tape measure at your natural waist or wherever you want your skirt to sit. Try to get the tape measure flat against the side of your body going down to the floor. This is helpful if you have somebody else that can help you take the measurement, but if not, this will work fine. So stand up straight, keep the tape measure tight against you, and I like to just put my hand down as far as it'll go, and then bend down and check the number that I want for my skirt. I think I'll do 25 inches. Alternatively, you can just measure a skirt that you already have. So now I want my skirt to be 25 inches long. If I just cut my fabric 25 inches, then I'll lose a few when I have to hem the bottom and make the waistband. So I'm going to add, I think I'll add 4 inches just to be safe and have enough fabric to do the hem and the waistband. So that gives me 29 inches for length. And I'm just writing this down so it's easy to remember throughout the process. And 23-inch wide. So when I say skirt panel, this skirt's going to have 2 pieces, the front piece and the back piece. They'll be the exact same in length, in width, everything like that. So I'll be doing 2 panels, 23 inches wide by 29 inches long. So I know this is kind of a weird angle, but I'm hoping you can still see what I'm doing. I'll try to explain it the best I can. So I've laid out my fabric here on the floor because it's just easier. I've put the right sides together. So the side that I want on the outside of the fabric, that's going on the inside right now just for cutting. And I've layered my fabric, so 2 pieces, because we're doing 2 panels the exact same size. So what I'll do here is get my tape measure, and I'm going to be measuring across 23 inches because that's the width of each panel of my skirt. Yours will be different based on the measurements we already got. So this fabric is from a fabric store, so it's got the nice clean edge here, and that's what I'll be using as my guide to make sure that I'm getting a perfect measurement. If yours does not have this piece this nice clean cut edge if you're using maybe thrifted bedsheet or thrifted fabric in general. Just do your best to get a nice straight line cut before you start marking out your measurements. So I'll be doing 23 inches across, as I said, and I'm just going to make sure I put my tape measure in the same place every time, stretch it straight across, and just use a pencil to make markings. So I'm using a pencil, like just a regular normal pencil, to make my marks, but it doesn't show up very well on this fabric because it's got some pattern. So I'm just putting in some pins right over top of the marks so that I know where I'm supposed to be cutting. And since we're doing 29 inches length, I'm now going to measure that. I've got the length marked out, the width marked out, and now I'm going to start cutting. Now make sure you double check all your measurements. Everything's where it's supposed to be before you start cutting. I also highly recommend using fabric scissors, not craft scissors or kitchen scissors. It just might not create a very clean edge. So there's no need to cut extra for seam allowance because the 8 inches we gave for the width is going to be enough for seam allowance, as well as comfort of the skirt. And then with the length of it, we've already accounted for a few extra inches to make the hem and the waistband, so there's no need to add any extra in when you're cutting right now. So I'm just going to fold this in on itself, make sure all my lines are nice and straight. Okay, that looks good. Now I find it helpful to use the pencil and just mark where the top and the bottom of the skirt are. So I just draw a little arrow on mine to indicate this is up. This is where the waistband will be. So now what we'll do is we're going to fold down the waistband to fit our elastic inside. So I know elastic is kind of hard to find right now because everybody's making the reusable masks. So if you can't find elastic, you can use like a drawstring type of cord. But if you have elastic, go ahead and get that because you'll need it as a guide to know how much to roll your waistband down. So I suggest rolling it down twice, just so that you get a nice clean edge, but if you are okay with rolling down once and having this raw edge on the inside, that's fine too. It's also helpful to have an iron ready so that you can press the seam so it's nice and flat. So I'm rolling mine down. I'm not going to do a double roll like I said earlier. I'm just going to do the single roll, and it's about 1 inch. So because I'm not doing the double roll, there will be a raw edge, meaning an edge that doesn't have any, the the raw threads are still there, the cut edge is still visible. That doesn't bother me on my skirts personally. If I'm making one for somebody else, I will definitely do the double fold so that there's no raw edge, but for myself, this is fine. So here's how that looks. If you have an iron and you want to do this step, you can just make this crease across here nice and tight. Just iron over it, making sure not to run over your pins if they've got plastic pieces because they'll probably melt. So that's one panel done. And now I want you to notice that we're rolling with the inside of the fabric facing us, the good part's still on the outside. And we're rolling it down so that we can see the outside part of the fabric, the nice part. That's that edge. Now what you'll do is sew this along. So do that for both, making sure that you leave enough room in this little channel for your elastic or your drawstring. So don't sew right up across here, because then when you go to put your drawstring in, it'll all be open along the bottom. So I suggest sewing pretty close to this raw edge here. I'll do a little line with my pencil to show you what I mean. Can you see those dashes? I suggest that's where you do your sewing. That'll leave enough room for the elastic. So go ahead and do that, and I will see you guys in a bit when I come back to do the sewing part, but for now I'm going to call it a day with this part of the filming. For the waistband stitching, just use a regular straight stitch. You don't need to do anything fancy. Just try to make sure it's nice and straight and even as you're sewing along. Here is the first panel done across the top there. So go ahead and do the second one the exact same way. Once your waistband is finished, you can start doing the hem of each panel. Just roll it up twice across the bottom and pin it in place. This angle just shows a different view of pinning the bottom hem down. Again, I decided to do a double roll just to make it nice and neat. Once you have that all pinned down, it's time to sew the hem on each panel, just doing it the same way we did for the waistband, making sure you take out your pins as you sew. Now we'll sew the sides of the skirt together. Make sure you leave a little bit of space just for seam allowance. And when you're sewing from the waistband down, make sure you leave a little bit of space between the top of the waistband and where you start sewing, because you'll need a little access part for your elastic or drawstring to go through. Now when I sewed this, I wasn't paying attention and I did mess it up with that little port for the elastic to go through, so I did have to go in and correct that, but I'll try to explain when we get to that part in the video. If you do end up sewing right over the waistband openings, it's not a problem, you can fix it. Once the sides are finished, turn your skirt the right way, inside out, or right side in, I guess. We can start threading that elastic or cord through the waistband channel. I didn't end up using elastic. I just found this rickrack ribbon in my stash, so I decided to use that instead. A helpful way to thread any type of elastic or string through your waistband channel is to just put it on a safety pin and use that as your guide for feeding it through the channel. It's a lot easier than tying it in a knot or anything like that. I know there are other ways of feeding through the waistband channel, other ways of sewing it to make it easier, but honestly, I find this is perfectly fine. So do you see where I'm putting it through to start? That is about an inch from the top of the waistband, and I didn't start sewing the side hem or the side seam there, because if I did, it wouldn't be possible to get the rickrack through the channel. I hope that makes sense. Sometimes it's kind of hard for me to explain something that I've been doing for so long in terms that make sense for other people, because I've just figured out how to do it, and I try to explain it, but sometimes it might get a bit confusing, so I do apologize for that. But what you'll want to do is just continue threading through that channel using your safety pin as your guide. Here is where I discover I forgot to leave an opening on both sides of the waistband channel. So as you can see, I sewed that straight across, and now my safety pin can't get through. So what I did was just use my seam ripper. You can also just use a small pair of scissors to pull out those stitches so that I can get my needle, safety pin through to continue threading for the waistband. After I finish getting the rickrack through the channel, I'm going to go back and just hand sew these openings, just the raw edges down, so that it doesn't fray or look a little bit off. This part of the skirt making process took the most time and was the most tedious. It took a lot less time to sew it all together, but this waistband part is definitely a little bit time consuming. So I suggest maybe watching a movie or listening to a podcast like I'm doing here, just to make the time feel like it's going a little bit faster. Once you have all of your elastic or your cord or thread or whatever through your waistband, you can trim off any extra. And what I did here was tie it in a knot, just so that it didn't end up coming through the channel again. If you have an elastic that you've threaded through, what you'll want to do is just sew over where they meet to make it a full circle. And then you can use the same hand sewing technique to finish off that opening that I'll be showing you in a little bit. So there's my knot. I've tied it big enough so that it won't come through the channel. I've decided to just keep the strings here on the inside of the skirt. So when I put it on, I will fit the waist size to my waist, and then I will just tie it in a little bow and tuck it on the inside of the skirt so you don't see it hanging out. This area is where I'm going to be sewing. It's the spot I had left open across the top of the waistband, and I'll also be sewing down the spot I had to open that I accidentally left closed up when I first started sewing it. I hope that makes a little bit of sense to you. I decided just to sew it by hand to make it easier, and it's less fiddly than doing it on the machine. But those dark stitches there are where I ended up sewing it. Just be careful if you do this not to sew down your elastic or your cord. Here is my finished skirt. As you can see, it's a very simple style. It's nice and comfortable, and it's a pretty modest style in my opinion. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and were able to follow along with me. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comment section of this video, and I'll do my best to answer those. Thank you so much.